The air smelled of smoke and dust after the battle. The ground was dark with ash and broken weapons were scattered everywhere. Dead men lay across the fields, their faces pale and still. Crows circled above, waiting for silence to return. Among the ruins of broken carts, burned tents, and fallen soldiers, a lone man moved carefully. His name was Ethan, a soldier hardened by years of war. He was tired, and his body carried many scars, yet his eyes were sharp and restless. Ethan was searching the wreckage, not for glory or reward, but because he believed no battlefield should hide survivors. He had seen too many left behind, and though he wore armor of his own kingdom, his heart was not stone. He stepped over shattered shields and burnt wood when a faint sound reached his ears. It was soft at first, almost lost under the cawing of birds. It was the sound of a child's cry. He froze and turned his head. It came again, weak but clear. Following it, he pushed aside broken boards from an old wagon. Underneath, in an empty space shielded by scattered planks, a boy huddled. The child's face was pale, streaked with dirt and tears. His small hands clutched at a torn cloak, and though his clothes were fine silk stained with blood and soot, they marked him as no farmer's son. Ethan knew at once. This was no common child. This was a boy from the enemy's royal line. The boy's dark eyes widened when he saw the soldier. He pressed himself back, trembling as though death itself had found him. Ethan looked around him at the silence of the empty field. He knew what he was supposed to do. An enemy child, the son of those who had brought fire and death to his people, was the very symbol of his foes. His commanders would call it fate if the boy perished here. But deep inside Ethan, there stirred something older than kings and oaths. It was not strategy that reached for him now, but humanity. He lowered his sword at once, letting it fall into the dirt, and knelt down so his eyes met the boy's. His voice was steady, yet gentle. He told the child he was safe. The boy blinked as though he could not believe it. Ethan carefully moved closer, slowing his steps so the child might not panic. Then he held out his hands. The boy hesitated, then reached for him. Shaking, he clung to Ethan's neck as the soldier lifted him from the rubble. Ethan felt the thin body against his own armor, and knew the boy had not eaten or slept in many hours. The child was not an enemy here. He was simply a boy who wanted to live. Ethan glanced across the blackened field. Smoke still curled from broken wagons. He saw no guards, no lords, no hand ready to claim this child. He knew very well the risk he now carried. If his own people saw him, they would call him a traitor. If the enemy discovered him, they might suspect trickery. But it did not matter. He could not ignore the life he held in his arms. Carrying the child carefully, Ethan moved away from the wreckage. Every step pressed against his pride as a soldier, but every beat of the boy's fragile breath against him planted a new resolve. He whispered soft words of comfort, though he knew the child did not fully understand them. What mattered was the promise behind them. He told him without hesitation that he would not let harm come his way. In the silence of that field, Ethan realized he had crossed a line. His past oaths demanded blind obedience to his king, but his heart demanded something far greater. He would save this child no matter the cost. The war of kingdoms still raged, yet in that moment one man's choice carried more weight than any drawn sword. Ethan walked on. The boy nestled against his chest, and a story greater than the battlefield had begun. The sun rose slowly over the battered land, its golden light casting long shadows across broken walls and shattered fields. The sound of drums carried into the air, heavy and serious. A reminder that the war was not yet over, though the night had been still. Ethan walked among his own soldiers, carrying no pride in his step. He kept the boy close, wrapped in an old cloak, careful that no one might see the silken clothes beneath and guess the truth. The child rested quietly against his shoulder, too weak to resist, too trusting to fear. But word spreads like fire in war. By the time Ethan returned to camp, whispers had already taken root. Someone spoke of a soldier carrying a child. Another guessed it was more than a wanderer's orphan. The eyes of men followed him, sharp in their suspicion. He said nothing, and kept moving until he found a quiet tent, where he gave the boy bread and water. The boy ate slowly, his small hands trembling as he chewed, but his eyes never left Ethan's face. It was not long before a messenger in red and gold banners arrived. The tents parted as the rider came through, and behind him soldiers bowed their heads low. The messenger called out before all men that the queen of the rival kingdom had demanded the presence of the man who had rescued her son. The camp fell to silence, every pair of eyes fixed on Ethan. Some mouths opened, ready to call him guilty, to brand him with betrayal. Yet the messenger continued, declaring that a truce had been called not for peace between armies, but for one soldier to stand before the queen herself. Ethan felt the stir of many emotions within. He did not trust the turn of fate, yet the boy clung to him as if his life held no meaning without Ethan's arms. He thought of what would come next if he refused. His own king would mark him as disloyal for keeping the enemy child. The enemy queen would call him thief if he tried to hide. There was no path left but forward. The journey to her castle was long and heavy with silent guards. The land changed from burned fields to green hills, until tall stone walls rose up before them. The gates opened, allowing the party into the inner courtyard. Ethan moved with steady steps, never once letting go of the boy's hand. Finally, they entered the great hall, a place carved of marble with tall columns that reached like white trees into the high roof. At the far end she stood. Queen Elira descended a few steps from her throne, as though to shorten the distance herself. She was known across lands as proud and strong, a ruler who bent knights to her will with her gaze alone. Her crown sparkled under the glass windows above, but it was her eyes that caught Ethan first. They were cold as frost and yet holding fire that refused to fade. The hall was filled with lords, ladies, and rows of armored knights, but no one spoke when she looked at him. Ethan bowed stiffly, though his heart thundered. The boy let go of his hand and ran into his mother's arms. For a moment the queen's face softened, but only for her son. Then she turned her gaze back to the soldier. She asked nothing of battle, no terms of truce, no exchange of ransom. Instead, her voice rang across the grand hall. She told all present that this man had saved her son from certain death. She said before her nobles that such strength of spirit was rare among enemies. Then she declared that Ethan was no longer a servant of another king. She would claim him now, not as prisoner of war, but as her own protector. Gasps echoed across the room. Nobles whispered. The soldiers stiffened, yet the queen did not wait for their protest. She had spoken, and her words were law. Ethan stood frozen, his heart caught between duty to his land and the fire of fate that now placed him at the side of a ruler not his own. He knew at that instant the path before him would no longer belong to the war of kings, but to choices that could light or destroy to kingdoms. The weight of her claim pressed upon him stronger than the weight of any blade he had carried before. Ethan left the great hall with heavy steps, as if each stone beneath his boots tried to pull him backward. The queen's words still rang in his ears. She had claimed him before her nobles, and there had been no chance to refuse. The boy, now safe in her chambers, had smiled with a trust only a child could carry. Yet Ethan's heart was far from calm, belonged to no throne but his own. And the thought of being bound to a new crown without choice pressed him like iron chains. That afternoon he was given quarters within the castle. The room was not small, yet it felt more like a gilded cage than a gift. Knights stood outside his door, their armor shining bright, their eyes watchful. Inside, he paced the space, neither free to leave nor free to fight. Servants brought him food, bowing as if he had already become part of the queen's circle. He could not bring himself to trust the smiles. At night he could hear the whispers through stone walls. Courtiers spoke of scandal, how their queen had taken notice of an enemy. Commanders grumbled among themselves, saying no foreign soldier should ever touch the soil of their kingdom except as prisoner. Some feared he was a spy, others claimed his rescue of the boy had been a trick. One young knight even swore he would not rest until this intruder was cast out or killed. Ethan knew danger was closer than it seemed. Still, the child sought him out the next morning with innocent joy. The boy ran through the hall, clutching Ethan's hand, pulling him to the gardens. There, for a short time, Ethan felt shadows lift. The boy laughed, chasing butterflies, while the soldier sat on the bench with his sword against his knee. The joy was simple, free from crowns and war, and it hurt more than it healed, because Ethan knew it could not last. That very evening, his fears proved true. A blade flashed in the torchlight as he turned a corner in the corridor. A man in dark garb rushed forward with speed and anger, the tip of his knife aimed for Ethan's chest. Years of battle reflex took over. Ethan caught the arm, dragged the attacker close, and slammed him hard against the wall. The knife clattered to the floor and rolled away. Within moments, guards stormed in and seized the man. The assassin shouted curses, claiming Ethan had stained the queen's honor, and that killing him was a duty. The disturbance reached the queen herself. She came down the stair, her robe flowing, yet her face fierce. She listened to the claim, then turned sharp eyes to Ethan. He stood, blood on his cheek from the struggle, but his voice steady. He did not explain in long words. He simply told her that he had defended his life when treachery struck. The queen's gaze flickered between him and the would-be killer before ordering the would-be assassin dragged away, his cries echoing as he was carried down the hall. Still, tongues did not grow silent. In the following days, men challenged him openly. A knight in the courtyard called him out and demanded he prove his worth with blade in hand. Ethan fought not with joy but with steady skill, beating back each challenger without killing them. Rather than ease the storm, his victories fanned the flames. The nobles muttered that he won too easily, that perhaps he was no common soldier but something more dangerous. But Ethan did not fight for glory or for the queen's claim upon him. Fought because the boy still ran to him each morning, laughing without fear. Fought because there was a strange truth forming in his chest. Every trial sharpened in him a resolve he had never known before. His loyalty was pulled apart from his oath to his homeland, yet his heart grew bound tightly to the child whose trust had not wavered. Though the nobles doubted him and the knights hated him, every attempt to break him only weighted his will with steel. One night, alone by the window of his chamber, Ethan looked across the city walls to the dark fields beyond. War still burned, unseen, but never far away. His own people called him traitor, his new hosts called him danger, and yet here he stood, unwilling to step aside from the path he had chosen. When he pulled a crying boy from under a broken wagon, he knew the road ahead would be sharper than any blade, but he also knew there was no turning back. Against the clash of kingdoms, his choice had begun a fire that could not be put out. The peace inside the queen's castle did not last. Riders from the borders came with grim news. Ethan's homeland had gathered a great army. With burning torches and banners raised high, they marched toward the rival kingdom. They called Ethan a traitor, cursed his name, and swore to destroy the throne that had dared to keep him. Word reached the city quickly, filling the streets with fear. Bells rang, soldiers tightened their armor, and markets closed as citizens rushed to hide behind strong walls. Ethan stood on the battlements, his eyes fixed upon the horizon. There beyond the hills, smoke rose where the advancing hosts burned villages to remind all who resisted of their power. Siege engines rolled across the plains, tall as towers, their wheels grinding the earth. It was no raid but a storm meant to crush the queen's rule. Ethan's body stilled with dread, yet his mind sharpened. He had once marched with those men. He knew their tactics, he knew the sound of their anger, and he knew the cruelty of their commanders. Yet now he stood upon opposite walls, his sword bound to protect not his homeland but the very kingdom he once fought against. The queen joined him on the walls. Her robe moved in the strong wind, her face stern but steady. She did not speak at first, her eyes also upon the burning fields. When she did, her words were cold steel. She said the enemy came not only for her throne but for him as well. His homeland would not rest until he was in their chains or in his grave. Ethan bowed his head, knowing these words to be true, yet he lifted his chin and swore she would not face them alone. The days that followed were marked with endless preparation. Blacksmiths hammered new swords, carpenters reinforced gates, and archers filled barrels with arrows. Ethan walked among soldiers, guiding their drills, showing them how best to hold the wall against the assault he knew was coming. His voice was clear and commanding, not with the tone of a stranger, but with the spirit of a leader. Men who once doubted him now listened as though their lives depended on it. The boy ran along the walls as well, cheering and calling out to the troops, his laughter strange against the dark sky of war. The attack crashed upon them with thunder. Fire rained down from flaming stones, walls trembled, the clash of steel echoed under the moon. Ethan fought at the front, his blade moving with speed earned from years of battles. He cut through lines of armored men, not with hate, but with purpose. Behind him, the defenders found courage, For when he stood, they stood taller. The queen herself appeared on the ramparts, speaking words that shone brighter than the torches. Together they held the first wave, though the cost was heavy. When the wall cracked under the weight of a battering ram, Ethan saw the danger before any other. The queen's young son had been standing with his tutor nearby, far too close to the crumbling stones. The earth shook, dust filled the air, and archers on the enemy side turned their arrows toward the small figure. Without thought, Ethan ran. He threw himself into the storm of stone, caught the child in his arms, and shielded him with his body. Arrows struck the mud at his feet, and broken stone cut his shoulder, but his hold never wavered until he carried the boy to safety inside the fortress. The sight was not lost upon the people. They'd seen him risk his life again and again, for one not his blood. When night fell, and the battle paused, his name rose in chants across the weary defenders. Soldiers beat their shields and called for Ethan, praising him not as stranger, but as one of their own. The queen stood high above, her heart burning with more than pride. She saw what others had seen too. This man, once an enemy brought low, had become the shield of her kingdom. As the fires burned outside and drums of war continued through the darkness, the city knew that their fate now turned not on a throne. It's not on an army, but on the will of one man who fought with both strength and mercy. Ethan stood at the wall, his sword in hand and his spirit unshaken, ready for the storm that would return with the sunrise. The morning sky bled red as the sun rose behind the enemy army. Their horns sounded, and the ground shook under the march of thousands. From the battlements, the defenders stood tense with weapons ready, their armor flashing in the dawn. The smell of smoke lay heavy in the air. Ethan tightened his grip on his sword, his eyes steady on the field before them. He had fought many battles in his life, but none like this. Here, he was not only a soldier. He was the line between despair and hope. The clash began with another storm of firestones and arrows. The wall shook again, dust raining down from the sky, yet the defenders did not break. Ethan commanded the men to hold formation, guiding them with calm authority. Where fear had once ruled, now his courage lifted them. He moved along the front, striking down each foe that reached the wall. His arm grew heavy, but he would not let weakness show. Amid the storm, Queen Elira stood on the highest step of the wall, her voice carrying across the field like thunder. She did not hide in safety. She lifted the banner of her house with her own hands, raising the spirits of her men. Her people shouted her name, but more than that, they shouted his. Ethan had become their shield, their anchor against despair. Every charge he met felt like proof that he had been claimed not by chains, but by the hearts of everyone standing at his side. The tide of war reached its peak when the gate itself exploded under the hammer of the enemy ram. Shattered wood and iron spilled across the yard, and a mass of soldiers stormed through. Battle turned to chaos. But Ethan rushed down into the heart of the clash. His blade moved with deadly force as he broke through their lines. He placed himself before the queen and her son, cutting down any who came within reach. The defenders rallied around him, forcing back the breach step by step. Every cry, every clash of steel thundered like drums, until at last the enemy lines faltered. Ethan saw it then, a figure rising among the press, an enemy commander he once knew by name. Years ago they had marched together as brothers in arms. Now the man glared across sword points with hate. His voice carried across the field, calling Ethan traitor and oathbreaker. With rage he charged. The two clashed before all eyes, sword against sword, strength against strength. Each strike rang like iron bells. Ethan fought not for glory, but for the boy clutching the queen's robes, for the people who had placed their hope in him. When the final blow came, it was swift and true. The commander fell, his blade crashing to the ground. The enemy host wavered. Without their leader, they lost order. Defenders roared forward, pushing them back beyond the ruins of the gate. Drums faded into silence. The field became empty except for fallen men and broken engines. For the first time since the storm began, quiet settled over the land. When the smoke lifted, the queen stepped forward. Before nobles, soldiers, and citizens alike, she raised her hand toward Ethan. She did not call him stranger or enemy. She named him protector of the crown and guardian of her son. She declared that he had been claimed not by force but by choice, for he had proven himself through risk and sacrifice. The hall that night blazed with torches as her words spread across the kingdom. Ethan stood with the boy beside him, small hand locked tight in his own. He no longer felt the chains of duty to his old land, nor the weight of accusation and the whispers of new voices. Instead, he felt a bond harder than steel. The kingdom cheered his name, and the queen's voice sealed it forever. He was no longer just a soldier of war. He was shield, father, and legend. The heart of two kingdoms torn by hate. One man's mercy had set a light that no sword could ever extinguish.